Hey, what's going on, everyone? Just want to do a video sort of discussing how my reading of history has been really wonky this year so far. Just realized when I was looking through some of the stuff over the past week, I haven't read any ancient Greek history, anything at all, which is like kind of concerning. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to remedy that going forward and everything. But I think I might do kind of like a reevaluation of like all the major like kind of genres that I read and how I've been doing so far this year. So let me know if that's something you'd like to see. But yeah, let's just talk about it. So I've read 14 books of history so far. I will say one thing, even though I haven't read as much of my kind of bread and butter classical and ancient history, I am part of Historathon. For those who don't know, it's like kind of a reading event that goes on over the whole course of the year, and each quarter is broken up into different time periods. And I will say I have a lot more like variety in that sense. Like I've hit every quarter at least once or twice minimum. So it's kind of interesting because normally I've sort of steered away from modern works of history and everything. So let's go ahead and get started. I got a couple here that are like history or history tangent, but like more like general histories that don't really fit into like a easy like slot, if that makes any sense. So first up, we got Grayling's The History of Philosophy, which is kind of just like a big overview survey of philosophical thought and the thinkers who were doing that philosophy over time. You get sections. There's a very lovely classical history, Greco-Roman philosophy section at the beginning. And I'm pleased that the medieval section was actually fairly brief. But, kind of going into, the 16, 17, 1800s. And then once we hit about, closer to the last century and a half, it kind of it goes into a much more like kind of deeper dive and whatnot. And then the separation between like analytic and continental philosophy, as well as some like East Asian philosophies and that sort of thing as well. Like I said, that's kind of more like, it's history, but sort of like history tangent. I don't know. It's kind of a combo of philosophy and history. A group read that we did was The Lost History of Liberalism from Ancient Rome to the 21st Century. I thought a lot of it was kind of like semantics and wordplay and that sort of stuff. I don't know. I think in general the vibe on the Discord too was that it was like kind of meh, to be honest. No, but I think people's mileage will vary with it. And then one more. I did A History of Biology by Michel Morange, and this is I think translated from the French if I remember correctly. But anyways, this is a history of the study of biology from ancient times, with like Aristotle and stuff, down to the modern age, which I thought was pretty good. I think because it was like a somewhat academic work, each era and each, once you get kind of towards the early modern period, each century is broken into its own unit, and then 50-year segments like after that, and then thematic in the last like in the 20th century and whatnot. It was kind of in that hybrid between like popular and academic, and I think the translation probably like wasn't helping it a lot, in the sense of kind of like a translation of an academic work. I felt like I learned a lot, but just like I said, don't be like prepared to have like your mind blown with like the prose and everything. But I don't think that was really the goal of like the translator or the author. So be as it may, I did thoroughly enjoy it just because I read a lot of nature and ecology and that kind of stuff. So the biological sciences are really cool. Next up, we have some ancient histories, and like I said, it's been poor this year. I don't have any idea what's going on. So I've only read 3-ish, and one's kind of like ancient and medieval. Let's start with the one that I listened to on audiobook. I kind of wanted to read some books on the Roman emperors when there was kind of a reading challenge going on about that, and I did 2, and then just forgot about it apparently. But anyways, this one is Aurelian, Restore of the World by John White, I believe it was. I actually really did enjoy this one. So Aurelian is an emperor right smack dab in the middle of the crisis of the 3rd century. You got hyperinflation going on, you got succession crises. This is the time period where there's like 40 emperors in 50 years or something along those lines. You also have the empire kind of splitting apart. different barbarian factions and stuff, are actually doing pretty good chipping away at the borders and taking whole swaths of territory. Aurelian kind of does come in and save the day and like kind of duct tapes everything together, at least for like the time being and stuff. So I like how there was a lot of context provided, and actually quite a bit about Aurelian as an individual as well, as much as you can kind of go. Obviously, when you're dealing with this time period, one of the sources you have to use a lot is the Augustan history, which is very dubious. We'll just say that. But Bizet, I thought it was quite well done. Then I read Anthony Everett's biography of Augustus here, The Life of Rome's First Emperor. And this is pretty solid. Like I said, nothing super extraordinary. Honestly, with a lot of Anthony Everett's works, they're just like, I always kind of seem to like rank them as like slightly above average, but not like amazing. But it's kind of nice to like know when you pick it up, it's going to be like I said, it's going to be at least like really solid. I think his Rise of Athens, it's probably my favorite one that I've read by him. I think this is my 5th book, so might as well, like I said, keep reading them and that kind of thing. And then sort of the hybrid between ancient and medieval. We got William Dalrymple's The Golden Road, How Ancient India Transformed the World. And I actually really did enjoy this one, so thank you to Bloomsbury for sending me this copy. And yeah, it's exactly what you think. Like I said, I've never really read much on a lot of like East Asian stuff. And this was obviously all about kind of the Indian subcontinent, which I don't think I've ever read anything directly about them per se. So it was really fun learning about kind of the origins of Buddhism, how it spread out of the subcontinent, as well as a lot of kind of the culture and mathematics and that kind of thing, and how those were transported along the Golden Road, which was in existence before the Silk Road and stuff. So I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed that one. And then going into some medieval histories, I have 3 here. So we'll start with the one I don't have. I did a buddy read with a friend over on the Discord, and we read 1217 by Catherine Hanley, The Battles That Saved England. And this is all about repelling Prince Louis out of England after, you know, the barons kind of offered him the throne and then changed their mind after King John died. You know, they're in a war with King John, so they're like, we'll do that to kind of get rid of him. But he kind of just dies on his own anyway, so then they're kind of that awkward predicament. But I felt this was just kind of like a bog standard medieval history of the time period. Her biography of Matilda is twice as good, so definitely go check that one out. But if you're really into like Magna Carta, King John stuff, 1217 probably wouldn't hurt either. And speaking of Magna Carta, I kind of read them sorted together on purpose because it's the same time period. This one's Magna Carta by Dan Jones, The Birth of Liberty. And I feel like Dan Jones is kind of like in that same category as Anthony Everett, where it's just like, it's like above average, but not like mind-blowing. I don't know, he is probably, like, I don't know, I think he's probably the most popular medieval historian, like writing right now, if I had to guess. I will say his Summer Blood was really good. But I do need to get to Powers and Thrones, and that's like the big one. That's kind of solidified that for him. But you learn all about kind of the context of King John, his two predecessors, how Magna Carta, or the barons were, their like kind of rebellion came to be a thing. What's in Magna Carta? What did it actually do? Probably more importantly, what did it not do? And that kind of thing. But my big takeaway is, it's always this big kind of idealized document for like champion of like liberty and stuff in the West. But really, like, the majority of the document is going, hey, we don't want King John to abuse his power. We aristocrats want to have, like, the power to do this stuff to the people. So it was like, I don't know. But you kind of learn and a little bit of historiography over time of kind of what Magna Carta has meant to other people. And then probably my favorite medieval history that I've read so far is El Cid, The Life and Afterlife of a Medieval Mercenary by Nora Beren. I want to thank Pegasus for sending me this one. El Cid, like I said, I haven't read much like Spanish history or anything. Like in college, I did do quite a bit on like the Spanish Civil War, but as far as like medieval history, not so much. But you learn pretty much everything we possibly could now about El Cid, because like I said, there's a lot of like, shrouded mystery there with like the sources and whatnot. But we can glean certain things. But more importantly, a lot of the book is dedicated to how different factions, different political parties and stuff have used the narrative and the mythology of El Cid, both on the left and the right, most notably with like the Spanish Civil War that I just mentioned, how they kind of use and abuse El Cid to kind of pigeonhole him into their narrative so they can like use him as like kind of the national figure at the time and whatnot. So found it super, super interesting. Definitely one of the top reads, at least for me, for this year. And then next up we go into quarter 3, which is roughly the years 1500 to 1820, which is probably like just my reading historically over the years is my weakest time period as far as like history reading and whatnot. But I do have a couple here. So one, I can't find it on the shelves, and I have no idea what happened to it. But it's Dark Brilliance, The Age of Reason from Descartes to Peter the Great, if I remember correctly, by Paul Strathern. And this is all about sort of the Enlightenment period and how, yes, it was like an age of reason, and that was kind of good, and we were kind of figuring things out. But also, at the same time, it was pretty crazy, and it was brutal, and there was a lot of like intolerance and that sort of stuff going around, despite it being the Age of Reason. There was a big kind of art focus on this book, which I found kind of interesting, like Caravaggio, stuff like that, because I personally don't know hardly anything about like arts history. Like, that's just like something I've never really read about. So I felt like I learned a lot from there. So definitely not as... It's definitely a much more focused book than the big book on the Enlightenment, wherever I put it, the Richie Robertson like 900-page book. But I think if you kind of are looking for that sort of more condensed kind of like book saying like, hey, this is really great and this is also really bad at the same time kind of thing, I think that would actually work pretty well. And then going on to some American histories for once, I read a pair of books here, the first 2 books in a trilogy. We got The British Are Coming, The War for America, Lexington to Princeton, 75 to 77, and The Fate of the Day, The War for America from Ticonderoga to Charleston, 77 to 80. And Rick Atkinson is pretty famous for his Liberation trilogy about the liberation of Europe in World War II. I think he won the Pulitzer for that one, Army at Dawn, I believe it was. And these are really good. Like I said, I've said it before in a couple other videos. He reads very much like Eric Larson, where it's very narrative driven, but you get tons of primary sources interspersed throughout the books. And where they're lengthy enough, you can get lots of different perspectives. You got the different kind of American theaters going on, who's kind of in control in different spots, as well as some French perspectives and quite a few British ones as well. So I feel like I've learned like a ton. I've even picked up another American Revolutionary War book to kind of go with these ones. So I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good selling point for that one. And then we go into some modern history, and I got 2 here. Another like monster book. I think this one was for March of the Mammoths, if I remember. But we've got Silent Spring Revolution, Kennedy, Carson, Johnson, Nixon, and the Great Environmental Awakening by Douglas Brinkley, who's a pretty famous presidential era historian. And this is all about how kind of the environmental movements of, the 60s and 70s came to be, what the policies of the different presidents, what their administrations were doing, what they did right, what they did wrong. And the author doesn't really pull punches, like, if they screwed up, even if they were like 90% of the time doing really well, if they did like a major just like flub, he would like point that out and say, that was clearly like a mistake. But he does give credit where it's due. For example, the EPA, like under Nixon, even if he didn't really want it, he did like kind of take advantage of it to get what he wanted and like really like kind of made sure it happened. So I don't know, I found it really interesting. Like I said, I read a lot about nature, ecology, that kind of stuff. So I found it really good. And then lastly, the most recent one that I read is Slaying the Dragon, A Secret History of Dungeons and Dragons by Ben Riggs, which is, it's kind of more like, it is like modern history. It's, D&D started in 1974, like officially, so really, this is like a period of, I guess it would be 74 to 97, where the parent company that Gary Gygax founded with some friends and stuff, TSR, Tactical Studies Rules, which was like the parent company of D&D, kind of their rise and fall, and it's kind of fun, because like, you get them like working out of their basement and everything, like just... nose to the grind and everything. And then kind of how they rise up and things start taking off, and then like the crazy 80s and stuff. And then, a bunch of like coup d'etats happen like within the company. And, sometimes there was bad decisions made before that and stuff. But then, the late 80s into the 90s, just tons of really bad things were happening, like managerial wise and whatnot. And how, like I said, TSR kind of like just, kept like drowning in the water, and then Wizards of the Coast snapped them up at the end there. So it's kind of like I said, it's a history of TSR. So I think it definitely counts as like a history. Though there is a lot of journalism where the author is like literally interviewing former employees and competitors and stuff to get a lot of the information and kind of like the hidden lore of of like the business practices, like where they had like Nerf battles and all that kind of stuff and falling through ceilings and everything like in the 70s and early 80s. So I found it to be a lot of fun. If you like D&D and stuff, it'd be a really cool one to read for sure. So yeah, those are the history books I've read so far this year. So I definitely feel like I need to read some more ancient history. I feel like I've done a really good job like kind of broadening and reading like lots of different stuff, but I'm like craving some ancient and classical history. So if you got any good recommendations, particularly Greece or ancient Greece, like adjacent or something like that time period, I'm all ears, and I'll be probably looking forward to snapping that up. So thank you all for watching. Whatever you end up reading, whether it's history or not, always remember, read victoriously.